Elizabeth Langle-Martin is coming from the Nashville Food Project, and their mission is to bring people together to grow food, cook and share nourishing food, and having the goals of cultivating community and alleviating hunger within our city. So I'm so excited to hear about this. I've heard a lot about you guys.
So, like Alex said, my name is Elizabeth Langle-Martin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work at the Nashville Food Project as the Community Engagement Manager. And I've been with TNFP for the last 3 years. I like to provide kind of a little bit of context for how I ended up at the Food Project, because I think that kind of informs the discussion and the way that I talk about our work. Prior to my time with the Food Project, I spent many years as a homeless outreach worker. So I worked with folks who were on the street or living in other conditions not meant for human habitation. And we worked towards long-term sustainable housing, as well as making sure that folks got their daily needs met while they were still working towards that housing. And as a part of that work, I built relationships with a lot of different folks. And one of the things that became very clear to me is that a lot of times when people sought services, maybe someone was in a vulnerable situation and they sought social services, if there was food alongside that social service, a lot of times it was really low quality. Because a lot of programs, a lot of nonprofits and a lot of other social service programs, if food isn't their main goal, there's not usually a significant budget for it. And so it's kind of putting together what can fill people's bellies the quickest and the easiest and the cheapest, so they can, allocate the most of their funds towards whatever their primary goal is, which is super understandable. However, I saw how that definitely exacerbated some of the existing health issues that were happening with folks on the street. I have a beloved friend, his name is Reno, and I worked for many years with him, several years before we were able to move him into his own apartment. And he was in and out of the hospital all the time. He had some really severe health issues that doctors couldn't figure out. And every time that I would pick him up from the hospital and it would be time to discharge, the nurse would give these really specific instructions about the types of food that he was supposed to eat, how often he was supposed to eat, types of food he was going to need to avoid, and things like that. And it was such a discouraging experience every time, because I knew that the community meals that he was relying on were not going to be able to meet those expectations for what the doctor was hoping for his diet. And so not only was this experience of homelessness, doing some really hard things to his body, but then the food that was available and the food that he could access during this experience was exacerbating his condition. And it was kind of like a rapid cycle. And so we moved Reno into his own housing, and about 4 months later, he passed away at 45. And thankfully, I'm so grateful that he was able to pass in his own housing, and that I had my time with him, an incredible relationship. When he was in housing, he was able to reconnect with his family. They celebrated his birthday right before he passed, and they made tacos. But just recognizing that the years on the street and the lack of access to high quality, nutritious food that his body needed couldn't be undone after that many years. And so got me kind of interested in this idea of food justice work and food systems work as another form of justice. And so that's how I ended up with the Nashville Food Project. And I kind of like to start with that story just because it frameworks how I got here. Our team is from a lot of different disciplines. We have folks on our staff who are professional farmers, folks who have extensive culinary experience, folks who are experts in development. We have all these different giftings, but I come from, I have a degree in social work, and I kind of come from that framework. And so that kind of informs the way I see our work and the way I talk about it. But there's a lot of different angles to discuss food justice from. So I can kind of go ahead and roll right into our presentation. Alex already introduced us, the Nashville Food Project. We work towards a vision of community food security. And so what we define that as, what that means for us, is that we want to be a part of a city or part of Middle Tennessee where everyone has access to the food that they want and need through a just and sustainable food system. And that's a pretty big vision in a sense that sometimes when we get frustrated or we're having a hard time figuring out, how to navigate something, we remind each other that a just and sustainable food system has never existed. So as we're working towards this thing that has never existed, it requires us to really rely on, these values of interdependence and justice, and care for the earth and care for each other, and reimagine ways that our systems can look, if we really want to work towards a world that we've never seen before, that there's no blueprint for. And so we want folks to have access to the food that they want and need, whatever that looks like for their family and for their own culture and their own preferences. And when we talk about food supporting a healthy lifestyle, I think it's important to mention that as an organization, we don't define what a healthy lifestyle looks for folks. If you ask a whole handful of people what a healthy lifestyle looks like, depending on their culture and their backgrounds and their experiences, it's going to look vastly different from person to person. And so we believe that folks are the expert of their own experience, but we want people to have access to a variety of fresh foods, that there aren't barriers to make sure that everyone has access to this thing that's basically a human right and that we all need, which is food. So I like to kind of set the scene for the world that we're doing our work in. And there's a big juxtaposition here between some of these stats. Right now, we know that about 15% of Nashvillians, some of my stats are from Nashville because that's where we're located, but honestly, they're pretty similar in other urban areas as well. The 15% of Nashvillians are food insecure. There's a lot of different definitions of food insecurity, but what we basically want to think about food insecurity as folks don't know how or if they're going to be able to access enough food to sustain a healthy lifestyle. So that might look different for family. Some families might have access to a lot of really low quality food. Some folks might have access to no food at all. So that food insecurity can look a lot of different ways and have a lot of different expressions. But it's the inability for people to get what is necessary to supply their family with adequate nutrients in a way that's culturally appropriate and meets their needs. One of the things we know is that folks of color, anybody who's non-white, is 2 times more likely to experience food insecurity. And so I was talking to a bunch of high schoolers once, and I said, well, what does that number tell you? And what we came up with is it's not just about food. Because if it was just a scarcity issue, we would see, universal kind of rates, but we see that people of color are 2 times more likely to experience food insecurity. And so then we start noticing that there's other things at play and there's other things at work. When we talk about food, we're talking about kind of the food system as a whole. And so one of the things we talk about is land access. So it's really important to know that every year in Tennessee, like it says on the screen, 100,000 acres of farmland is lost. So it's developed, it's reallocated towards other things. But then we get into these details about for the remaining farmland, for the farmland that's still here in our nation, who is holding that land. And only 3% of all U.S. farmland is owned by people of color or non-white individuals. I was just a part of a training for Hudson Valley Farm Hub in New York, and they shared some really incredible information that I screenshotted real quick, and it fits in here real nicely. It says that 85% of farm workers, so folks who are doing the everyday labor of cultivating, caring for, harvesting our food, are Latinx. But only 1.4% of all of our farmland is owned by Latinx folks. And so we get to see some big areas of brokenness in our food system right there. That the folks who are really bringing us food aren't the folks that are benefiting from working the land and providing this invaluable resource. Strongly juxtaposed is this idea that as we have 15% of Nashvillians who are food insecure, and we have farmland that's disappearing at a discerning or concerning rates, 40% of all the food that we produce nationally goes to waste. And I think that I have a hard time, if you're like me, I have a hard time visualizing what that means. But basically, just a little under half of all the food that we produce ends up in the landfill. And so, that has implications on our earth, but it also has implications for the folks that aren't being able to have enough to eat. Because then it challenges this idea that hunger is an issue of scarcity. Because hunger can't be an issue of scarcity if 40% of all of our food is going to waste. So then we start to think about hunger as an issue of justice, and hunger as an issue of power. And so our work kind of exists in the tension of these spaces. We are navigating and working in a very broken and unjust food system, while trying to, in our own little corner of the world, kind of shift that needle. And so it's kind of important for me to kind of paint this picture of this is the reality that we're working in. And so these are the things we like to be aware of when we're doing our work and when we're growing our programming. So why food? I'm not sure if you know, that's a little sarcasm, but like the world is pretty broken right now. Well, always has been, but especially if we are feeling it right now. And so there's lots of ways that we could plug into justice work. There's lots of things we could do. There's no lack of good work to be done or good trouble to be had. And so like a lot of times we get the question, like, why are you plugging into food? And for us, it's because food is universal. We all need access to it. We need it to live. Food underlies our stories as individuals, as cultures, as people groups. But then food is also this lens that we can look through, and basically we can start to explore and identify all these other different systemic injustices. And so we just listed, as we're working as part of this food system, this broken food system, and as we're trying to increase food access and land access, these are all the different elements that come into play, and each of these house, all of their own struggles and work to be done. And so for us, it was this way that we could recognize kind of the connectedness of all these different types of injustice and how it's reflected in our food system, and how people's access to food can start to hint at things that are underlying issues in our society and in our culture. So as Alex said, this is our mission statement. We want to bring people together to grow, cook, and share nourishing food alongside the goals of cultivating community and alleviating hunger in our city. And it's funny, when we talk about our work, we always revisit and we're like, does this still really capture what we're doing? Because the deeper we get into this work, the more we understand the nuance. But this is a good way to kind of sum that up in an elevator pitch, if you will. Nobody wants to read our whole manifesto for a mission statement. So this idea of grow, cooking, and sharing kind of captures what we do and kind of the areas that our programming touches when it comes to hunger in our city. When we look at programs that we do or efforts that we make or changes that we're doing as an organization, we always consider how they kind of impact these 4 quadrants. So how they increase folks' access to fresh fruits and vegetables and culturally appropriate food, how they foster community or enhance social relationships, if we're doing it in a way that is honoring our earth and the symbiotic relationship that we need to maintain with her. And then if for one of our programs that we'll kind of discuss in a minute, is it building economic power for the people that we're working alongside? So these are kind of the 4 quadrants that we look at when we're talking about the things that we do in our little corner of the world. So the first of that mission statement was grow. And so we have an extensive urban agriculture program. We steward 3 agriculture sites in the city of Nashville. And within these 3 sites, there's 3 different types of programming. The first is individual community garden plots. So that's kind of what you think of when you think of a community garden, at least most others that I've been a part of, that folks who are interested in the program are allocated a certain amount of land or a certain plot or a certain raised bed. They decide what they'd like to plant, through our staff and through our funding, we support the infrastructure of that space. We provide training and interpretation, and access to bulk seeds and things like that. And then folks harvest whatever that they grow in their plot, and all of that goes home to supplement their family's grocery budget. And so that's kind of a traditional community garden model, and that's a large number of families grow food with us in that way. We prioritize families in the application process who self-identify that they have some barrier to accessing fresh food on a regular basis. So sometimes that's a financial barrier. Sometimes the things that they're used to eating and preparing, they can't find in stores. We work a lot with the New American community. So sometimes folks, something that's really important to a cultural dish, like an important ingredient, a fruit or a vegetable, is really hard to find at Kroger, or it's really hard to find at Walmart, and it's considered a specialty item. And so one of the ways that we return folks kind of land access and allow them to kind of choose what they're wanting to grow and how they're wanting to feed their families is to providing these individual community garden spaces. The second is a new effort this year. It's still a community garden, but we are calling it the Full Circle Community Garden, or the Full Circle portion of our farm. And it's communal growing. And so we have a certain amount of families who will sign up for this communal growing. These might be folks who would like to get in the garden, but what they really need is, and what they really want is, a weekly share of fresh produce. So they might not want to be solely responsible for the care of all of their own plants, but they want to be able to learn a little bit about growing food, and they want to be able to take home a share each week. And so it'll be a group of about 30 families who cultivate and care for a large portion of space with oversight and support from our farming staff. And they commit to a couple hours in the garden working alongside of us. And then every week for 4 months, they take home a share, like a CSA, of that garden space. So it's a good kind of low barrier entry to folks who might not be ready to or interested in stewarding their whole own plot, but still really want that access to those freshly grown fruits and vegetables. And the third program we have, which is, I always say my favorite, and then I always think, well, they're all kind of my favorite in my own way, but is our Growing Together program. It is a branded program that we inherited. It used to be a separate entity from the Food Project, and that entity had lost funding, but we felt like this program was such a valuable resource to our community that we absorbed it and decided we would fund it ourselves. And what it is a market garden program. So it is supporting the efforts of 8 farmers. Last year it was 8 farmers, primarily who entered into the U.S. as refugees from Burma and Bhutan. And these folks came into the U.S. with a lot of agricultural skill. Most of them grew up growing fruits and vegetables in their own countries, in their home countries. A lot of them will tell stories about how this is, their grandma grew this, my parents and I grew this. But when they moved to the U.S., a lot of times folks are in rental areas or spaces that don't allow land access, and spaces that are apartments or things like that you can't grow your own food. So these 8 farmers have the agricultural skill and the desire to grow and sell at market to generate income for their family. So last year we had 8 farmers who farmed with us through the Growing Together program, and collectively I think they earned $40,000 through their sales. Each farmer identifies their own financial goals. They're saying, this is what we want to earn this year. This is what we want to plant. And we, as the TNFP team, help find marketing outlets. So we help develop a CSA model and attract customers. We work with local restaurants who want to purchase really incredible organically grown produce. We sell at farmers markets. Newly this year, what was really cool is one of our interpreters for this program, who has been a longtime interpreter. She's been a farmer with Growing Together before. During COVID, she came to us and she said, folks in the Burmese community, which is the community she's a part of, are really struggling. And she's like, most of the families that I work with are they're used to holding down jobs. They're really hard workers. They've always just made it work. But with COVID, so many things are shutting down. that a lot of folks are suddenly out of work, and there's all these barriers to accessing safety net programs, especially for folks who English isn't their first language and might have concerns or fears about documentation and things like that. And so she said, I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do as the food project to make sure some of these families are receiving fresh food. And we said, absolutely. So the Nashville Food Project worked with that interpreter. Her name is Lulu. And she helped us identify families who are struggling. We leveraged our funds and our purchasing power as an organization to purchase shares of produce from the Growing Together farmers. And Lulu distributed those to families. She would do porch drops, and other people in the Burmese community would help her navigate that to make sure that folks who had to quarantine or were out of work or were trying to apply for a benefit and it hadn't come through yet were getting food that they needed. So it's kind of incredible that not only are the Growing Together farmers growing to sell to the wider Nashville community, but TNFP has also been able to leverage our funds, purchase from them, and provide culturally appropriate produce to some folks actually within that community who are struggling. And so they grow an incredible mixture of crops that are local or like crops that are common to Middle Tennessee. So like tomatoes and okra, all the stuff that we see at every farmer's market. But then they also grow some incredible produce from seeds or from traditions that they brought from their home countries. So things like bitter gourd and water spinach and daikon radishes and all these new vegetables that I have been introduced to since having the Growing Together farmers in my life, that eat and grow a lot. They're very passionate and grow a lot of really spicy peppers. And so I was getting the CSA for a while, and I am not a spicy pepper person, so I would make my husband taste each pepper before I would taste it because I wasn't sure what level of hot I was going to get. And so one of the things that they've offered to our community is offering organically grown produce that you can't find elsewhere. So that's been of interest to a lot of culinary folks in Nashville. Some pretty big restaurants and well-known chefs have utilized their produce as part of their menus. And so we just love that program, and it's something unique and really exciting that we've been able to support the infrastructure and also to help navigate kind of the unique climate of Middle Tennessee. So those are the three types of programming that exist in our agricultural spaces. These are our actual agricultural spaces. The first up top is Magruder Community Garden. It's all raised bed. A lot of the raised beds are accessible. It's in an area of North Nashville, and a lot of the gardeners for that site are from that neighborhood. So it really is kind of a very traditional, in the sense of that it's a very traditional neighborhood community garden where all the folks are from that immediate space. We have the Haywood Lane Garden right underneath that, and that is where our Growing Together Farmers Garden. So there's only, all of that space is farmed by those 8 farmers who are part of that project and are growing to sell at market. And then our newest site is in collaboration with Metro Nashville. Metro Nashville recently obtained a huge portion of lands in Antioch, which, if you're not familiar with Nashville, it's like southeast Nashville. And it's the newest metro park. Right now it's not open to the public in a sense that there's no trails and things like that yet, but it's still in its early stages of development. But when they were doing community listening with neighbors around that area, a lot of people asked that they would reserve a portion of the park to honor that space's kind of history of local agriculture. And so they did that and honored that through their relationship with us. So this year, I think we'll have about 80 families that are growing in that space through individual community garden plots and kind of shared communal full circle farming. We have our own pollinators out there. We have a hoop house. We have a tool shed, and we're continuing to invest a lot of infrastructure into that space and making sure that we honor the neighbors' desire to keep local agriculture there, and that folks in the community have access to the land and support if they're interested in learning to grow their own food. Let's see. I cannot see the chat. So Alex, are there any questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thanks.
So sometimes what we're more known for, I think, is our meals program. So when people hear the Nashville Food Project, they automatically think that we have something to do with food, understandably. And so our meals program is a lot of times the most outward facing of our programming. We operate 2 commercial kitchens, one at our headquarters and another commercial kitchen that's a part of another community organization 2 streets over from our headquarters. And so both of our kitchens are about 2 streets away from each other, but we steward both of those kitchens, and out of those kitchens, we cook about 5,000 made from scratch meals each week. All of those meals are served in partnership with other nonprofits. So that's a little bit of a different model than some other food organizations you might be familiar with. We are not what you think of when you think of a soup kitchen or a food pantry. We make from scratch meals. We then deliver them to the partner nonprofit, and then they serve those meals alongside their poverty interrupting programming. So our meals are served alongside after school programs, GED classes, workers' dignity and workers' rights seminars. Let's see, they're served at, domestic violence shelters. They're served through Meals on Wheels programs. So our food is leveraged to enhance these other poverty interrupting services that are going on in our city already, because the folks in those programs yes.
Do they work with? I mean, there's homeless encampments all over Nashville now. I know there's one in West Nashville that has 500 people in it, and I know you said before you were working on people, helping people get housing and things like that. Is anything going on over there? Any food that's being delivered over there, or what is a way to lobby our government or whatever to help to find these people get housing or whatever?
So when it comes to food, we have a partnership with the Metro Homeless Impact Division. And so every day, outreach workers who do jobs very similar to what I did prior to my time at TNFP pick up from scratch meals in individually portioned containers, like you see in this top photo. And they're at temperature, so they're hot and ready to go out. And those outreach workers are distributing those meals as they're providing their other outreach services. So as they're working with folks for housing paperwork, and as they're taking folks to apply for food stamps, they're able to provide them with a hot meal.
Two questions. What about the homeless encampments that have these huge populations of people in them just living in tents? Is that cover any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Homeless Impact Division works with a large range of outreach workers, and so most of the encampments in our city are known and serviced by outreach workers. Okay. Our city is in an affordable housing crisis, and so I think that just because someone's in an encampment doesn't mean they're not receiving services. Sometimes it takes 2 years to get someone into housing. And so I think that we are not providing any meals to congregate meal services for individuals without housing. And a lot of that's due to COVID, in a sense that a lot of social services, which is one of the things we've had to pivot for COVID, is a lot of social services rely on congregate programming. So they rely on attracting a lot of people to a certain space, providing programming and other resources like food or clothing or showers in communal spaces. With COVID, we don't want people to all congregate in a single space. And so we've had to
They are whether they want to or not. Yeah.
And so we've had to reimagine being in your own tent or your own encampment is different than being at the same table. And so so right now, our biggest effort with folks without housing is working with the Homeless Impact Division and providing their outreach workers with hot meals to distribute to the folks they're working with.
And then my second question, it looks like the containers you're using are black plastic, which
Mm-hmm.
are not recyclable. And they make totally recyclable containers that are made out of cardboard that a lot of people use for takeout in restaurants and things like that. And I'm wondering why they can't use those instead of the black plastic.
Yeah.
And they're reheatable, more reheatable. They're more healthy. They keep things just as warm, probably even more warm. And even if they're not recycled in a recyclable container, that, you know, when they go into landfill, they disintegrate.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We have tried a whole myriad of different containers. Not all containers do keep food safely at temperature. By the health department, we're required for food to be able to remain a certain temperature for a certain period of time. And additionally, a lot of times with decomposable containers, prior to the food getting to someone, they will leak through the bottom. We've utilized those a lot of different times, but we have a sustainability initiative in our, as a part of our staff. And so we're constantly trying out new things. Having to do individually portioned meals is something that's very new to us. We traditionally do large pans of things in recyclable containers. However, technically these are recyclable. Unfortunately, in Nashville, they don't recycle a lot of plastic items. So even though something is, so it doesn't matter if something is marked as recyclable if there's no place to recycle it. So as of now, that's definitely a pain point for us in the sense that COVID requires, and I think we're seeing this across industries, COVID requires a lot of single-use products that we were phasing out. And now for health regulations, some of those single-use products have been reintroduced, which is kind of a hard thing to navigate.
Antoinette,
because I can't believe that black plastic is going to keep things any warmer than the cardboard ones, or even even aluminum or whatever is recyclable. Anyway, just a thought. I know changing over to something might be more difficult, but it's something that really makes a difference to our environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Antoinette, can you share with us the brand that you're talking about? Because there are a lot of different types of to-go containers, and some of them are better than others. So if you know the one that they could.
Chipotle uses it's like a cardboard, and then they top it with a totally recyclable aluminum top, and it stays actually warmer than the plastic. It's, even if you don't recycle the cardboard part, it just disintegrates instead of like living for 42 years in landfill or ending up in our oceans. And the aluminum is, of course, recyclable.
Right.
So I don't know what the brand of that is, but I know Chipotle uses them, and many places use them, and we go out of our way not to we don't always succeed, but not to, get takeout from places that use a lot of the plastic, that isn't recyclable. Anyway, I know that's not what this is about, but I always just like to throw that out there, because I can't see where plastic keeps things any warmer than this does. It actually, I think, would keep it warmer. And I will buy one of their burrito things, and 3 days later I haven't thrown it away and it hasn't leaked through the bottom. So it's I think it would not leak through the bottom. Anyway.
Yeah, well, if you have brand recommendations, I'd love to share those with our team. I know they have tried.
Whoever could, if you just find out what Chipotle uses.
Hey, you can't see this.
They look like that. Yeah.
They look like that? Okay.
Yeah, they look like that, and they have just like regular, the top is just like aluminum, and I just recycled the aluminum and
My family eats a lot of Chipotle, so I'm pretty familiar with those containers.
yeah. So if you find out what brand they use, I mean, it has to be, find out about. I don't want to hijack things, but I just look.
I think I have a link for it. I can put it out there on the chat. It comes from Start Packaging. And yeah, they got burrito bowls, 300 count for $56. I don't think that's great, but better.
Yeah,
I'm sure
the environment.
I'm sure you get in bulk there.
Huh?
I'm sure if you get them in bulk, you can get a better price on them. But yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I know we've struggled with that at UT as well to try and move away from styrofoam and things like that. But at least you guys aren't using styrofoam.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
There's a question as well in the chat, and it's from Susan, and she asked where the market food sold.
I'm sorry?
There's a question that was in the chat, and it's from Susan. She asked, where are the market foods sold?
Oh, so from our Growing Together farmers? They are currently all sold through CSA shares. So this year, we used to do individual weekly purchases like through farmers markets and things like this, but our CSA program has grown to a size that we're able to move all of the farmer's product through a CSA model.
What does CSA stand for?
Yeah, Community Supported Agriculture.
Okay.
So what it means is that a customer, such as myself, pays for 8 weeks of produce. So they buy a share, and then each week they receive a set amount of produce from the farmer. It says a couple things. CSAs are incredible. One of the things that model does is that farming is incredibly expensive and incredibly risky. And so what it does is it lets farmers rest knowing that they already have an outlet. When they put the seed in the ground, they know who's going to buy that product. And so that reduces the risk for a farmer. Another thing that it does is allows the consumer to buy directly from their farmer, which changes the relationship people have with food and reduces waste in a sense that a product's not going to go sit at a farmer's market or sit in a grocery store. It's going to go directly from the farmer to the consumer and go home to hopefully be used in full. And so we started doing just an 8-week CSA a few years ago. Now it's grown, and we offer fall CSAs and spring CSAs, which kind of span a variety of different vegetables and different crops. And then our farmers use cover crop and things like that in the winter and do overwinter trainings. So preparing for the next year. An important part of our meals program, which kind of sets us a little bit different from some other efforts, is that a large portion of our food is recovered food or donated food. And so we work with farmers and grocers and restaurants and other types of food producers to help them anticipate when they're going to have excess and intercept that excess while it's still good and usable, so we can leverage food that's already in our community and getting it into nutritious meals that are getting to folks who are experiencing some type of food access barrier. So last year we recovered over 219,000 pounds of recovered food. And so that's over 219,000 pounds of food that was kept out of the landfills, that was incorporated into nutritious meals while it was still good and usable. And a lot of what our efforts require in that way is really facilitating relationships, helping restaurants, helping farmers understand when we can safely accept a product, like when in a product's lifespan is the safest time for us to intercept it and use it. So helping folks, doing education and helping folks understand that once a pan of rice has been served out of it at a wedding, we can no longer use it because that's not safe to reserve to other people. So, but helping folks come up with creative ideas of how they anticipate waste earlier in that product's lifespan, so we can intercept that and utilize it, and it doesn't end up in a landfill. We always at sometimes receive some items that are past their lifespan. Let's say we get an incredible gift of a harvest, a tomato harvest. We go through each of those tomatoes and we cut off bad spots and we use every inch of what we can. But anything that is not usable, that we have compost systems at all of our sites. At our garden sites and at our kitchen sites, we also collaborate with a local partner, Compost Nashville, that helps us manage some of our compost, and then that compost gets used as inputs for our garden, because all of our garden efforts are organic. And so we're able to kind of close that gap there, that if there is any type of food that's not usable in our kitchens, it can become inputs for our garden through compost systems. And so recovered food is actually a huge portion of our budget. It's 19% of our whole 2021 budget is in-kind donations, which is mostly recovered food. And we have a staff member who's that's their role. We have a refrigerated vehicle, and we do a lot of food recovery with farms and grocery stores and restaurants in the area. One of the things that happened at the beginning of COVID, when we started seeing like early or maybe beginning of April, when restaurants started shutting down during the first wave of COVID, a lot of them had already placed their orders for the coming weeks. And so having relationships with those kitchens and knowing those chefs, they've reached out and said, hey, we just placed this order and it got here. We need you to come intercept it and make sure it's being eaten, being used, because, you know, we're not ready for this to go to waste. And so we have a lot of different types of food relationships with different folks. And
hey, Elizabeth, there's a few questions in the chat.
I'm ready.
Okay, Lance asked if farming space were available in a county other than Davidson. Do you guys work in other counties, Rutherford, for example?
We don't. We don't work in any other counties besides Davidson, and part of that is because travel area, in a sense that as long as we're just the Nashville Food Project and have, you know, one small staff, we want to reduce the amount of travel time that we're utilizing, and also our community gardens, spaces that community folks are utilizing as part of our land access efforts, then it needs to be easily accessible via public transportation or a very short drive from places where people are living. So currently we only serve Davidson County. We have one meal partner that works outside of the county, but they pick up their prepared dinners from our kitchens and then they distribute them over the county line.
Awesome. Okay. And Jack asked, how long has the project been operating and working with restaurants?
Yeah, so TNFP started in 2007 as a kind of an arm or a franchise of a other nonprofit out of Texas. And at the time, it was really kind of what you think about when you think about like food, you know, food distribution. We would bake sack lunches and we would go distribute them to people, you know, under bridges and at low income extended stay hotels. And one of the things we recognized is that that was not super effective in the sense that there's always people that we can find to give a lunch to. However, those folks were experiencing so much more than just food insecurity. There was all these other barriers and injustices that were happening. And so we couldn't, as a small team, develop, you know, close, deep relationships with every person that we distributed food to. And so we thought, well, who's already has relationships with the folks that we're distributing food to? And that's other organizations, other mutual aid efforts that are doing different kinds of poverty interrupting work. And so we thought, okay, our expertise is food. So we're going to collaborate with others who have different areas of expertise and help them let us know what the food needs are in these different pockets of the Nashville community. So then in 2011, we started doing local agriculture. And yeah, in 2011, we started doing urban agriculture. And at that time, we recognized that what we were doing was very different than the organization that we were branched off of. And we incorporated and became the Nashville Food Project. And throughout the whole time, we've been working with chefs. But about about 2 or 3 years ago, we brought on board someone who's long supported us as a volunteer, but she's a food writer in the Nashville area. Her name's Jennifer Justice, and she's a long-term food writer in our area. She's published several cookbooks and has a really vibrant culinary connections. And so she came on as our liaison to work with the culinary community. Yeah, thanks for sharing those links.
Awesome. I see Charlie's having his hand up.
Charlie, I'm ready for you.
Okay, I just have a comment. I looked on the internet a minute ago about the food containers, and there's a company called Green Start on the net, and they have a subsidiary that sells containers for restaurants and such called Green Restaurant, like Green Restaurant. And what's better than cardboard is they sell stuff that's made out of vegetable stuff. They sell containers like the plastic containers that are made out of sugar cane or wheatgrass, and they sell these plastic looking containers, clear containers that are made out of corn.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie.
And
how do you spell that? Can you type that into the chat so there?
Can you put the link in there?
A link, like
green. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that, but I
can do that. But how is it spelled? GreenSteraunt?
Yeah,
greensteraunt.com.
Yeah. Right. But just type in compostable containers. Compostable containers. They got a whole bunch of them. I mean, that's just one that looked really good.
Thank you.
That brings me to a question. What do you do with all the what do you do with all the composted food? Or I'm assuming you compost it, but is there a place where you put all the food waste? I mean,
any food waste is composted, and once it is broken down appropriately, it's reintegrated into our garden spaces. It works really well because if we don't have it, we have to pay for compost, since we do all organic agriculture, and so being able to leverage a resource that's already been given to us that might not be able to be used in a meal if it's past its prime, but can be used as compost, means that we're still receiving a resource and it's still an input that helps us grow food for our programs.
That's so cool. Question, because I know Stephanie has chickens. Does any of your farmers, do they raise eggs? Do they have chickens for eggs? Or
we have at past garden sites. We don't currently, but over the next couple of years, we have a multi-phase plan for our new space at Mill Ridge, our community farm, and animals are definitely something that's on that list. We have a bunch of people very passionate about chickens. I have
fantastic
overseen. I mean, it's not like you can just leave them alone. I mean, it seems like there would need to be somebody.
Well, I mean, farmers are out at their spaces every day, and so they're able to help care for animals in that way. But since we're using metro land, we're slowly navigating what it looks like to share space with a metro property, and so that's one of the considerations for future phases of that project. I myself am very passionate about chickens. I have a whole bunch. I have ducks and I have dairy goats, and we have quite the little menagerie of animals here at my house. So, and we have a lot of fellow chicken lovers on our team.
Don't get Stephanie started on goats.
Oh my God.
It's like, oh.
So my goats are essentially just spoiled pets.
Yes.
They're very beloved. We have 2 Nigerian dwarf goats. And our first attempt at breeding them was not successful. And at this point, they're just beloved family members, and so they just get to stay because they're cute.
They make great lawnmowers.
They do eat a lot of our brush, and my 2-year-old adores them, and I adore them, so they're part of the family.
In Jersey City, I'm from New Jersey, and in Jersey City, there's this old cemetery that they actually have these goats that just keep
manage it.
Yeah.
There's
That's
a couple
amazing.
companies. There's a couple companies here that I can't think of their names. They have funny
Rent a
punny
goat.
something like that. But it's basically you, instead of, using harsh chemicals or really expensive equipment, you basically rent a herd of goats to clean up your property, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
They
And
eat everything.
and I just love mine. Mine are spoiled rotten.
You're kidding.
They have very specific preferences, but they're wonderful and I love them.
I have a question, Elizabeth, about like private gardeners who have excess produce. Do you reach out to the people?
We do. Yeah, we our volunteer community and our donor community. A lot of them are very passionate home gardeners, and so we accept hundreds of pounds of tomatoes, or we accept a pound of spinach and kind of everything in between. So we do receive, especially in the peak of growing season, when a lot of folks are producing more than they can consume themselves at home. Once they've pawned their zucchini off on all their neighbors, then it comes to us. How many farmers do we have? We have, let's see, our garden team currently has 4 staff members. We have a director of garden programs, a director of garden operations, who's been a long-term professional farmer. Our Growing Together education manager is a long-time Middle Tennessee farmer. She also has incredible relationships with a lot of restaurants because she used to grow for them. And we have a staff member who does community gardens, the community garden programming. So she does more of the educational aspects and kind of the hands-on learning support. And then we have currently 8 farmers who are new American farmers who are part of our Growing Together program. Where can we buy the peppers, any Burmese veggies for sale? Those are currently, sadly, but also not sadly, they're currently all sold through the CSA shares. So this year there isn't a way to buy individual produce products because the CSA is just a way more efficient way for the farmers to sell their product, which is a little bit of a bummer for folks who like to buy week by week, but it's good for the farmers and good for the CSA holders.
Is there a link that you can provide for people who do want to donate?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Let me see.
I'm also happy to go grab that off your website.
Oh, thanks.
On there, yeah. I'll go look for that, and you can double check me that it's the correct link.
Yeah. Let's see. So what's in a meal? We talked about that we have the main portion of our food is donated and recovered food. For a while, a portion of our agricultural space was production gardens. Like we actually grew the food that came into our kitchens and was used. Eventually, our meals program grew at a rate that our own agricultural efforts couldn't support. And so we decided that agricultural space was better used to support families growing. And so this year we're phasing out our production gardens in lieu of being able to provide more spaces for land access. A year or 2 ago, we started doing a local farm investment effort. And so we're slowly growing that each year. Last year, we spent $31,000 with local food producers. We prioritize farmers of color, and we have some really incredible relationships. We have hydroponic lettuce that's to die for through a local effort called Hydro House. And so we...
Does that mean that you give them money, let's say, to start up or support them, or training to...
No, I mean, most of these folks are professional farmers. We just try to prioritize supporting farmers of color because traditionally there's a lot less support for their growing efforts. It's harder to get a loan. There's a lot of different things that have to do with our broken system. But we work with all sorts of different local farms. So not only farmers of color, we work with other local farms as well. Farmers at the beginning of the season. So actually our bid process just closed. They bid and they say, like, I want to grow this item for you. This is what I can offer it at. These are my growing practices, that kind of thing. And so then our staples that we use a ton of, that we know we're going to use a ton of, we accept a bid. So like for salad lettuce, we work with Hydro House. And so they provide a set amount of fresh lettuce. They drop it off every single week. So they know how much we're going to purchase. We know how much we're going to get from them. And it's a stable and expected source of income. And we never have to worry about where our high quality lettuce is coming from. For more seasonal crops, farmers submit fresh sheets. So fresh sheets in farmer world, as much as I understand farmer world, is that it's an item, it's an updated sheet week by week that lets us know what they have available and what the cost is. And then our kitchen orders from those producers week by week based on what's in season and what's available. So that's a really low risk way that they can let us know what they have excess of, what they have to offer to sell, and that our kitchen can get a lot of variety. Another thing that we do is we buy seconds. So seconds are, wonky vegetables that aren't as pretty as other ones, but are still high quality, and our kitchens are willing to work with wonky vegetables. And so a lot of times, if there's, a harvest of particularly ugly potatoes, we get a farmer will sell it to us as a discount, at a discount, because they're like, I'm not sure how people at the farmer's market are going to like those potatoes, but the same high quality as the other potatoes, they're just a little wonky. And we're like, never met a potato that we didn't like, so we can make it work. So we try to work with local agriculture a lot, and that amount is increasing year by year as we're learning new systems and new ways that we can do that. That doesn't create extra labor for our meals team, but is still sourcing a lot of really high quality food. So this top one are the types of partners we support. This was just for last year. So obviously there's some, like you see the tornado crisis response. In 5 weeks, we served 12,000 meals that were unexpected, that were purely put out because of the tornado. So you can see the different types of partners we have. COVID long-term recovery response is a new category, obviously, for this year. Some of our partners, specifically ones that serve children and elders, receive a federal reimbursement for each person they provide a meal to. So some of those partners actually then redistribute that reimbursement to us, since we're the one providing the food. So it's actually, some of our partners are social enterprises. So like the YMCA, they receive a reimbursement for each child in their programs to cover their food costs. And so then they provide that reimbursement to us that we can reinvest in our program, and that way we can fully subsidize other smaller grassroots efforts that don't have any funding for meal support. And so that's one of the ways that we make our program really sustainable, is organizations that have a budget for food or receive a federal reimbursement, they pay us a small portion for the meals so that we can cover all of the costs for organizations that don't have those resources. That helps us reach out and prioritize smaller grassroots or mutual aid efforts, or folks that aren't eligible for federal reimbursement but still have a lot of barriers to fresh food access. Oh wait, I'm going the wrong way here.
Quickly, Anne asked, do you get veggies from the Society of St. Andrew?
We do. I love SOSA. We do. We partner with them a lot. There was a time, it's so funny. I mean, when you've been around for 10 years, like we've tried something, it's not worked well, we've adjusted. We want to be flexible and meet needs as they arise. And we used to try to coordinate our own volunteers to go and do gleaning and harvest projects. And we're like, oh, this is not our area of expertise, because a lot of times you have to mobilize those volunteers really quickly, at a moment's notice to respond to a farmer's request. And so we started partnering a lot with SOSA, who is uniquely suited to activate gleaning volunteers. And so a lot of times if we have a farmer that reaches out and says, hey, I want to share, this field of strawberries with the Nashville Food Project, but I need someone to come harvest them, we'll coordinate with SOSA and and they'll harvest those for us and for other food efforts that they support. That we love them. I just got to before COVID, they were one of my last big tours at our space, was SOSA folks from all over the nation. So we have a big community of supporters. We're involved in a lot of different things in a lot of different worlds, in the food production, in the culinary scene. And so we have a lot of supporters that help us sustain what we do. Pre-COVID, we utilized over 200 volunteers every single month. And our gardens and our kitchens were constantly filled with volunteers. You can see here that since we didn't have a lot of volunteer opportunities in 2020, besides the first few months, this volunteer hour is from 2019, but over 16,000 hours were dedicated by volunteers. And so that's kind of honors that portion of our mission, that our goal isn't just to produce food, it's to create community around this idea of creating a more just food system. So we have home cooks who have a ton of skill that come and share their services with us. We have, Anne, yes, that was the time. We're going to get back there, I promise. We have home cooks like Anne, I'm assuming, who have a lot of skill in the kitchen. And then we have folks who are brand new, who have never held a knife, that come in and help us chop veggies and put together, bread recipes and go through huge donated containers of peppers and sort them out. And so lots of hands and hearts go into the work that we do. We have volunteers who come in and do special projects. We have a long-term volunteer who's an expert. I'm not sure if he was an expert or if he's just gotten that way through volunteering with us, but at creating homemade pasta. And so he pre-COVID would bring in a group once a week, and they would make fresh pasta for us to freeze and use in our meals. We've had, pastry chefs come in and make tons of cookie dough for us to freeze and use in our meals and as treats for different partners. We've had lots of local chefs come in and kind of find an item that they're really excel at and create lots of incredible stock or lots of incredible sauces. So lots of hands and hearts, like I said, go into this work. Right now, our volunteer program is temporarily suspended, which has been a hard last year for our team. Going from having 200 to 300 volunteers every month to having no volunteers meant that our team had to pivot a lot and change the way that we work. But we made sure that happened. A lot of us, like myself, are working remotely to make sure that our meals team stays healthy and has limited exposure so they can keep getting meals to partners. Do you ever have to adjust to needs of people with food allergies and sensitivities? At times. Definitely at times. Because we batch cook, there's some limitations or some special adjustments that can't be made because food just wouldn't be safe being produced in spaces where those allergens are. But we're really upfront with that with each partner. As we establish a relationship, we go over any kind of special requests they have, and we are very transparent about if that's something that we can accommodate or not. A big one is pork. We have partners that their participants don't eat pork, and so we have to make adjustments for that specifically. We're not a gluten or peanut-free facility. So for folks that have those types of allergies, that's where we just really communicate really well with the partner and are really transparent about that. So they can make other arrangements if they have one person who has that type of limitation. Because, we are working in spaces that have a lot of those ingredients. So we want to make sure we're transparent about that and that everybody is as safe as possible.
Yeah, I can imagine the challenges with that. I'm a member of the board of a local celiac support group. So I know our national association has developed some programs for food supplies for people with problems. So if there's any reason you wanted to kind of tap into what they're doing or just.
Oh, yeah. Let me jot that down and I can share that with our meals team. What was the organization?
Well, it's the National Celiac Association. If you want to contact me, I could,
Okay, awesome.
mediate that.
Yeah. One of our meals team actually has celiac. Thankfully, she's able to work with ingredients with gluten, but just can't consume them. So just ask other people to be taste testers.
Yes.
Can you type that information in the chat and how to get in touch with you as well?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would be, just because this is being taped, I'm assuming the chat will be in there, but I don't know how that works.
Good question.
I think the host has to download the chat record. So Alex, you might have to download the chat record if y'all want access to that afterwards.
Thank you.
I found that out the hard way.
Yeah,
I thought it would be safe too. Yeah, so right now we have people who are supporting us in unique ways since volunteering isn't an option. We have a lot of incredible donors. We have a lot of people who faithfully give $5 a month. And that resource adds up. We have people attend Food Project events. We have a lot of collaborations with local chefs when COVID isn't an issue. So we'll have chefs that come to our space and cook an intimate dinner for 40 folks and come out and do question and answer and develop their, a special menu and things like that. And those ticket prices all go to support our programming. We have things like the Nashville Brew Fest, where different breweries design beers specifically inspired by our work. And so just a lot of different creative options for fundraising that we encourage our community to get involved with, because it's a fun way to share food together, but then also to support our mission and make sure that we're able to have the funds we need to keep the things that are important to us going. We also do a lot of community events. I organize a lot of community events right now virtually, but at times in person, that are free of charge and open to the community, just in fostering those relationships. We have a lot of folks right now who support us via pantry item drive. A lot of staples that we go through a ton of, kind of listed there: olive oil, whole wheat pasta, chocolate chips, nuts or dried fruit, are items that we use a lot of, and they add up really quickly cost-wise. And so a lot of times folks will host a drive for those items, or we'll just pick up an extra thing of olive oil every time they go to the grocery store or something like that, to support us. We have people who support the Food Project by being a CSA customer for Growing Together. And then, as always, we have people who kind of are brokers and connect us to other justice work or connect us to new farms that we're not familiar with or things like that. So there's people who support us in a myriad of ways. We have an incredible, his name is John. Some of you from the Nashville area might know him, John Potter. He is a professional knife sharpener. I'm not sure if that's his official title, but person who sharpens knives. And the way that he supports our work is every single week he comes and offers his services free of charge and sharpens all of the knives in both of our kitchens. So there's people who, I'm always constantly amazed at the way people are kind of leveraging their unique gifts and talents to support this work. Yeah. Any other questions? That's kind of my spiel. But I'd love if there's more questions.
That's a question.
Yes.
Do you have training in your community gardens for people to go back, homeowners to go back to their own sunny green lawns and convert it into, something they can grow food for their families? Yeah.
So most of the families that we're working with don't have green spaces to grow, which is part of the land access struggle. However, there are people who work through our garden programs and decide that they want to grow at more space than we offer and take that and go home to their own yards if they have them.
Some of our small, tiny spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
Square foot gardening.
Yeah.
The guy.
Currently, we don't have the capacity to support garden education outside of our own garden spaces. However, we do collaborate with a lot of other organizations, such as Nashville Foodscapes, which it's a for-profit, like worker-owned entity that establishes and cares for garden beds in Nashville residents' yards. They do a lot of foodscaping, but they also have a Gardens for All program, which is that when a consumer purchases one of their services, they have the opportunity to pay slightly above the cost in order to invest some funds in someone else having those resources. And so there's times that we'll reach out to them and we'll say, like, for instance, I received an email from someone who was working with a woman in, I think, East Nashville, who had had her home destroyed in the tornado and had her like extensive food production in her own yard destroyed. And she was obviously heartbroken about her house, but she was actually more concerned about her garden because she had spent so many years investing in that space and growing in that space. And that was a way that she grew her food, but then also just something that was incredibly important and meaningful to her. And so we collaborated and shared that information and talked to Nashville Foodscapes, and they said, you know, we can come in and help her and do the work and set up new garden beds and stuff through our Gardens for All program. So a lot of times we partner with them by offering space for them to do trainings and things like that. So we have some really cool collaborations that if it's a service that we don't offer, a lot of times we can still connect to someone who does offer that. Just this past week, I got a phone call from someone asking about, trying to remember the vegetable now. I think it's cassava. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but there's a family from the Congo who was trying to grow cassava here in Nashville, and they could not get it to grow. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about that vegetable, but let me see what I can find out. So the garden team connected me to a professor at TSU who was doing like experimental growing with sweet potatoes and amaranth. And so he connected me to someone else. So we essentially went down this whole road of different farmers, all to find out that it's too cold here. They need a good 10 months of really warm climate to mature. But it was just cool to see this network of people kind of mobilized to kind of find this answer for this family. So we do we don't have an official referral program, but we do a lot of networking to try to help connect people who are doing similar work in our city.
Okay, two comments. One, 16,000 hours is an impressive number. If you break it down to one person, 8-hour days, it's 5.5 years. A
lot of time.
And I saved the chat, so I will send a post-meeting. Thank you for joining, and I'll include the chat in that. And if you didn't register, I won't know how to send it to you. So please go to the website and register if you didn't for tonight, if you got the link some other way. And a question, how much does a CSA share cost?
Oh, goodness. I don't know off the top of my head. This year we started doing an option to do a half share, which is a better fit for single people or people with 2 people in their family. All the half shares have sold out, which means that apparently that was a good option for folks. And then there's different combinations for if you're buying both shares together or if you only want spring or only want summer or fall. So I can't remember at this time, but I can get you a link that has all that information. And I just shared in the chat our community impact report. This just came out in January. It features kind of some of highlights of our work and our stats and quotes from participants and partners about stuff that happened in 2020. And 2020 was such a unique year. We worked with partners who were pivoting day to day, trying to figure out how do we still provide in these weird circumstances, how do we still provide quality services to the folks that we're working with, and how do we provide what they need? And so we did a lot of pivoting and started sharing food in new ways. We now have produce partnerships where we, if folks aren't needing prepared meals, but what their communities are needing is really access to bulk produce. We have a couple relationships that we're piloting doing that type of sharing with. And so COVID like most of you, I'm sure, have experienced it. It's definitely continues to highlight the thick places in our world that are broken. And so vulnerable folks in our city, it just made more vulnerable. But it's also given us, like, it's challenged us to be flexible and to pivot and to be in really close conversation with all of our partners and figure out how we meet needs that might be changing day to day or week to week. I'm going to put my email in the chat too. So I know we're kind of getting close to time. So in case anyone has questions that I wasn't able to answer.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you so much. You answered all the questions in such good detail, and it sounds like you guys have a lot of great stuff going on. So I'll probably be emailing you soon.
Thanks. I would love that. And I did get down the information about the containers. Like I said, we do have some new efforts for sustainability as part of our team. So I think that's a space that they're exploring. You know, how to reduce single-use products in our kitchens while still meeting the needs of our meals team and our budget needs. But we're working towards some cool things like becoming a zero waste site, and we have one of my team members is kind of heading up those efforts, and we do sustainability education every month with our team and things like that. So
perhaps one of these companies might be, you know, need a write-off or something to.
We're happy to take their write-offs.
That's the deal. And I think it's awesome too that you compost and utilize that and teach that. It's just like such an important thing, and I think what you're doing is great.
Thank you.
You also have on your contact information if somebody does want to donate or do a, you know, I noticed you said like a $5 a month can provide this, or do you put that information on the chat also?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I can do that. And yeah, our website, we work pretty hard to keep our website pretty up to date and have a lot of detail because we want that information to be really accessible to folks. And so, but at the same time, I know that can be a lot to dig through. So if you have a question that you would like more information on, feel free to shoot me an email. It's a big part of what I do. And I'm happy to find that answer for you and make sure you get the information you need. But I'm so glad I got to be here with you tonight. Glad I got to have you all in my attic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.